Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a high-stakes survival story from 50,000 years ago that literally changed the fate of humanity forever. We're looking at the very first sea voyage in history and uncovering who these unknown heroes really were. I mean, imagine making a leap so massive, so incredibly dangerous, that it permanently rewrites the human story, but your name is completely lost to time. To really understand this, we have to begin in a world completely unrecognizable to us today. Picture the black volcanic sands of what is now modern-day Java, Indonesia. We are talking about a world without maps, without compasses, and frankly, without even a word for the concept of an ocean. Here, a small tribe of early humans lived on the absolute edge of a volcanic hell. And to make matters worse, sea levels were steadily rising, threatening their coastal existence and rapidly shrinking their world.
The tribe's shaman perfectly captured this sheer terror, and it really humanizes our ancient ancestors' desperate reality. This wasn't just some gentle climate shift. To them, this felt like the end of the world. The earth was violently shaking from volcanic activity, and the rising waters were literally swallowing the shores they called home. They were faced with the ultimate terrifying realization. There was simply no place left for them on that land.
So their true motivations were fear and hunger. Let's actually look at why they would risk these terrifying, completely unknown waters. We constantly romanticize exploration, right? Like it's always this noble quest for knowledge. But the reality for these unknown heroes was incredibly stark. The question for them wasn't how to sail, but why risk certain death on the water? Well, the answer was simply that staying meant death anyway. Unlike modern explorers who are driven by curiosity or glory, these early humans were pushed entirely by the sheer hunger and fear of their collapsing world. Against these overwhelming odds, 9 souls decided to step into the unknown, making a choice that would echo through history. Think about the absolute vulnerability of this mission for a second. Exactly 9 people chose to face the abyss. Just 9 souls. Specifically, we're talking about 7 men, 1 woman, and 1 infant. A single, fragile family unit up against the vast, terrifying expanse of the open ocean. They were leaving behind literally everything they knew to step into a void that no human had ever entered before. But hey, they weren't completely helpless. They used their incredible ingenuity. To survive, they basically invented the concept of balance before they even invented sailing. They cut bamboo poles and bound them tightly with coconut fibers to construct a primitive raft. But the real stroke of genius was adding a side outrigger. This crucial piece of engineering was designed specifically to prevent the raft from capsizing in those violent waves. And get this, alongside the outrigger, they carried one absolutely vital piece of cargo. Their only weapon against the freezing cold of the open ocean and any unseen monsters lurking in the dark was a fragile, small fire, carefully kept alive inside a simple clay pot. Out in the middle of a vast, wet ocean, that tiny flame was their only source of warmth, protection, and hope. Basically, if the fire died out there, they died. Of course, surviving the ocean came with a heavy price. Let's dive into the terrifying reality of their journey across that open water. The timeline of their crossing honestly reads like a primal nightmare. On day 1, they left the only shores they had ever known. As they drifted into the deep, they genuinely believed the sea was angry with them. And this fear completely peaked on the 3rd night when a massive violent hurricane struck. The immense waves battered their primitive raft, physically shattering the roots of their vessel while they just clung to the ropes in each other. It wasn't until days later that they finally saw strange birds in the sky. And since birds don't fly too far from shore, they finally had a signal of nearby land. But this incredible, historic crossing came at a devastating cost. 3 of our unknown heroes lost their lives to the sea during the journey. Despite their genius with the outriggers, and despite guarding that fire with their lives, the ocean demanded a heavy price. It's a pretty sobering reminder that this wasn't some triumphant cruise. It was a desperate fight for survival, where a 3rd of their group perished. Yet for those who did survive the crossing, it was the dawn of a new continent. They were about to make history without even knowing it. Imagine emerging from the thick fog of the ocean and suddenly a mountain appears. They had actually reached land. They stepped off their battered raft and took the very first human steps onto the strange red soil and alien plant life of a completely untouched continent. They didn't have a name for it back then, but today we know it as Australia. They had inadvertently discovered an entirely new world. However, this new world was anything but empty.
Here, they faced massive, unknown, terrifying beasts. Just imagine stepping onto land and locking eyes with a diprotodon, a giant, now extinct marsupial that basically looked like a massive koala. These were creatures they had absolutely never seen before. But remember that tiny fire they had so carefully protected inside the clay pot? It became their ultimate salvation once again. They used that transported flame to build massive fires in their new caves, terrifying the giant beasts and securing their safety.
This brings us to the legacy of this first voyage and how it completely changed our destiny. Let's look at the macro impact of this micro-survival story.
The geographical reality of what they achieved is staggering. They crossed 150 kilometers of open, turbulent ocean. Now, to put that into perspective, that is a journey that today might take barely 2 days by a modern yacht. But 50,000 years ago, on a bamboo raft bound with coconut fibers, those 150 kilometers were an absolute eternity. Yet, bridging that relatively small gap of water fundamentally altered human destiny forever.
The ultimate demographic explosion that followed is literally mind-blowing. We go from those initial 9 original souls who pushed off the black sands of Java to the millions of humans who subsequently populated this vast new continent over millennia. That single terrifying journey was the exact spark that ignited a massive human expansion across a completely new world. But for the individuals who actually made the trip, it was a one-way ticket. As the surviving child stood on the red soil and looked back at the vast ocean, a profound realization set in. No one would ever return to their mother island. The crossing was just too dangerous, the price was too high, they had permanently severed ties with their past. They hadn't just survived, they had started a new world. It's so easy for us today, right? With our GPS and satellite maps, we think we have discovered absolutely everything. But we've got to remember that every single great discovery in human history started with a frightened step into the unknown. Just like those nameless heroes on their bamboo raft 50,000 years ago, pushing through terror and hunger to find a new horizon. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought to mull over. What if your next journey into the unknown is the most important of your life?